Toss aside the touchy-feely notions of love in business and recognize the real power it holds. Welcome to the Love is Just Damn Good Business podcast with host Steve Farber. Drawing on his work with a wide variety of companies from the Fortune 100 to smaller family-owned businesses, Farber shares inspiring interviews with business leaders and proven strategies for how you can create experiences that your customers will love by developing a culture that your employees, teammates, and colleagues love working in. Discover why and how love, at the end of the day, is just damn good business for you too. Here's your host, Steve Farber.
Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Love is Just Damn Good Business podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the fine folks at the Extreme Leadership Institute, which by some startling coincidence happens to be my company. So come check us out, see what we do at extremeleadership.com, and you'll find some great resources there and all things about all things extreme leadership and how love, as the title suggests, is just damn good business. And toward that end, my guest today is Jim Kouzes. Now, I want to give a little preamble. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Jim. I'll give you his bio and all that, but I'm going to do a preamble to the bio. The word mentor is a word that gets tossed around a lot nowadays, and I've heard people use it in a lot of different contexts, like so-and-so is my mentor. Oh, really? That's amazing. Yeah, because I read their books, and they had a big impact on my life. Well, that's great, but that's not exactly what I would describe as a mentor. To me, being a mentor is something much more personal. I wrote about this, of course, in my book, Greater Than Yourself, that mentorship is a deeply personal interaction, not just a conveyance of knowledge through any medium, but is something that involves a deep relationship. So having said that, that was my preamble to this point. Jim is my most significant mentor in my career. And we go back, we first met at the Tom Peters Company, a place that I joined in 1994. And I want to tell you a little bit about that in just a bit. But for the uninitiated among you, Jim Kouzes is his claim to fame, I would say, is that he's the co-author with Barry Posner of the Leadership Challenge, which is, and this is not an exaggeration, nor is it a cliche, the Bible of the leadership research world. I know it's a cliche to call anything other than the Bible, but it is probably the most significant body of research on leadership on the planet that they've been conducting now for close to 40 years, I'm guessing. The Leadership Challenge, their flagship book, is now in its 6th edition. It's sold over 2.5 million copies. And he's a fellow at the Doerr Institute for New Leaders at Rice University. He's co-authored over a dozen books. He is the co-author as well as of the Leadership Practices Inventory, which is I don't know if it's the most widely used assessment tool for leadership, but if it's not, it's pretty damn close. He can tell us about that in a second. And he's gotten all kinds of accolades. One of the greatest leadership advisors, coaches, educators on the planet, and that is not an exaggeration. And like I said, Jim and I met it was actually in 1994 when Jim was serving as the president of the Tom Peters Company. And he was the guy that actually interviewed me and ultimately hired me to join the team there. And that set me off on a new trajectory in my career, which has been, needless to say, and quite an understatement, an extraordinary series of events for me personally. So, Jim, it's my great honor and pleasure to welcome you to the podcast.
Steve, thank you. And thanks for that gracious introduction. I am honored to have been your mentor, and now you are mine.
Well, that is lovely of you to say, and I'll accept it at face value.
Because one of the things I'm now trying to learn more about, although we will talk a lot about how this all got started, is love and leadership. We wrote about that many, many years ago, but I think it's become more salient, more important, and more significant more recently. And you're the guy who had the guts to write the book, Love is Just Damn Good Business. So you are now the expert that I need to learn from.
Thank you. That's nice of you to say, although we all know that being an expert goes way beyond publishing a book on the subject. It doesn't automatically qualify one, unfortunately. But I want to, I really want to delve into this subject of love, but I want to give a little kind of personal historical context. So I have, out of camera range here, I have a little stack of books. And I pulled these off my shelf. I've moved a couple of times over, once in the last 20 years, I guess. But since my days at the Tom Peters Company, these books have followed me, of course, everywhere. So I'm going to give you a little tour. And for those of you who are watching on video, you'll see these. For the rest of you, I'll describe it. So here, first of all, is the book Credibility, the first edition of your book with Barry Posner called Credibility. Now, this book came out around 1993, which was around a year before I joined the Tom Peters Company. So when I was in early stages of talking with you and the team there, this was the book that I read first. And as you can see, if you're looking at the camera, I still have my original Post-it notes with all of my, the highlighted margins and notes as I was originally becoming your student. And before I joined the company, our mutual friend Jenny Nichols, who is the one that introduced me to you, gave me a copy of this book that you had signed for me. And here's what it said: Steve, with great respect and admiration for your talent and best wishes for your future. Which was followed, my future was followed shortly by joining you at the company. So thank you for those best wishes, and then also the incredible leg up. Okay, so the next book that I want to share with you, folks, is this book, and that is an edition of the Leadership Challenge. This particular edition came out in right around the time, I think, that I joined the company. I think maybe a year later. I think maybe it's 1995. 1995, this edition. And this was right at the time when this book came out, when you had asked me, after having been at the company for a year, you had asked me to join the executive team as vice president of, I guess we called it vice president of training or something like that. And here I want to read your comment. Steve, congratulations on being, quote, the best damn trainer I've ever seen, end quote. I think you were actually quoting Tom Peters there. You are number one in my book, and now you're about to become the number one training industry executive. Think of that. I'm honored to be on your team. Stay in love, Jim. September 1995. Exactly however many years ago that was. This month. And then, so that, I know this podcast is beginning to sound like this is all about my journey, but your influence on my journey is so significant that I just really want to just indulge me for another couple of minutes. Because the next book is a book that came out after I had, I think it was after I had left the company. I left the company in 2000. No, it was before I left. It was then my last year or so at the company. It came out in 1999. It's a book that whose ideas have, as you'll soon see, deeply influenced my perspective on love and business. It's a book called Encouraging the Heart. And you actually used an example of from one of my clients in this book. And your inscription here says, Steve, thank you for being what we write. Your personal example uplifts and inspires always. Stay in love, Jim. And then just one more. So this was a while after that. I'd gone off on my own. I'd spread my wings. and wrote my first couple of books, and actually had written 3 books by this point, and had established a bit of a name for myself and a body of work. And this book came out, so I'm going full circle here. This was the next edition of Credibility that came out in, I think, 2011, if I'm not mistaken. And you say, Steve, thank you for your gracious, this is critical, thank you for your gracious and generous endorsement. You uplift our spirits. Thanks for making us greater than ourselves. Love them and lead them. So this is full circle because, yes, on this book, I actually contributed an endorsement on the book cover. So we go full circle from best wishes for your future to writing a damn blurb on my mentor's book. I mean, that's just unbelievable. So that's the arc of our journey, Jim. And thanks for joining us. We'll tune in next time. No, I'm kidding. But it's I just want you to know how significant your influence has been on me. And you were the first guy that I had ever heard that talked about love as being the foundation of leadership. And that's what opened my eyes to it. That's what essentially focused my lens. So I began to look for that more intentionally, and that led to my entire body of work, which is really all about that. So I'd love to hear your perspective on, and we'll let you talk for a while, your perspective on this idea of love and where, kind of where you first got that spark and why you began to bring it to the forefront.
Wow, Steve, thank you. You can just keep on talking about me if you'd like.
Like, how often do you get to listen to your own humans while you're still alive?
No, it's joyful. It just tells me how much I miss you and miss the opportunity to be with you and have this time to chat. So this is really a pleasure. And, I was reflecting on this because I knew we were going to be talking and knew we were going to be talking about this topic of love and that it's just damn good business. And I was reflecting on the first time I believe I actually heard someone talk about love and business. And it wasn't any of the folks from our books. It was my early mentor in the field, a guy named Roger Harrison. I don't know if I ever talked to you about Roger, but Roger was an early mentor of mine. Met him when I first moved to, about a year after I moved to California. He lived in Berkeley at the time, and he was originally a professor and then went on to found his own training company, Positive Power and Influence, was his original body of work with Dave Berlew, who is a student of McClellan's at Harvard. And that was actually the first opportunity I had to do a designed learning experience in California back in '72 at San Jose State University. And over the sort of 8 years or so that I was there, worked with Roger. And then in a transition year, 79, 80, I actually went into business with Roger. And Roger made a comment early on that always stuck with me. He said that love is made necessary by the fact that there's no such thing as an independent life. And I think that stuck with me because in very subtle ways that I really wasn't aware of consciously. But when we wrote our first book on leadership, Barry Posner and I, we talked about leadership as a relationship. And I think making that connection now between Roger's early influence on love is made necessary by the fact that there's no such thing as an independent life, and that it arises from the recognition of that fundamental connectedness, helps tie together for me the whole notion of leadership as a relationship and why love is so important to leadership. Is that leadership, because it's a relationship, implies connectedness, that leaders are not independent of followers. They are connected to followers, and you can't understand leadership without understanding that relationship between followers and leaders. And some of that comes through in the book on credibility, when we took a look more deeply at the foundation of leadership, which we wrote about in the second chapter of the first book, The Leadership Challenge, and then wrote an entire book on that.
Let me because go back. Check my notes in the margin.
Well, it's, you know, and in writing that book, just going a little history here, since you're allowing me the opportunity to talk a bit, is reflecting on one of the early interviews we did, which has ended up being the only story which has survived all 6 editions and soon to be a 7th in 2022. We start writing on that in another few weeks, Barry and I, came from Major General John Stanford. And you know this story very well.
What year was that?
So we were doing the interviewing. I think I interviewed John probably in 84. 83, 84. I'd have to go back and look at my notes, but that's when we started working on doing the research. Started in 83, 82, 83. So Steve, when I was sharing with you the interviewing that we were doing for the work on the Leadership Challenge, the first book, when I was at Santa Clara University with Barry Posner, one of the people that we had the opportunity to interview was Major General John Stanford. And John was at Military Traffic Management Command and in Alameda, California, not far from where I live now. And after the end of the interview, where he talked about his personal best leadership experience in the military, I asked him the closing question, and I asked this of everyone during the time we were doing these interviews. What would you pass on? What lessons would you pass on to others who want to learn how to lead? What's the best way to develop yourself as a leader? And he said to me, whenever anyone asks me that question, I tell them I have the secret to success in life. The secret to success is stay in love. Stay in love gives you a feeling that you can really ignite other people, see inside other people. People who are in love have a greater desire to get more things done than other people. A person who is not in love doesn't really feel the kind of excitement and energy than anyone else does. And that staying in love is the secret to success in life. I'm paraphrasing what John said, but that's the essence of what he said. And that message of stay in love was the first time I heard a general say love in a sentence about leading. But then as I talked to more military people and talked to more exemplary leaders, I was stunned by how the best leaders used love fairly frequently in their conversations. Let me give you one other example. Erwin Fetterman, former chief financial officer and CEO of Monolithic Memories and now a partner in U.S. Venture Partners, a venture capital firm. He said, you don't love someone because of who they are. You love them because of how they make you feel. And then he went on to talk about how we don't often talk about leadership and love in business, but he would say, I contend, however, that all other things being equal, we will like someone and we will work harder and more effectively for people we love, and we like them in direct proportion to how they make us feel.
So if a leader makes me feel valuable, makes me feel like I'm making a great contribution, then he's equating that somehow to my reciprocated feeling is in that category of love because you've made me feel that way. Is that a fair paraphrase of what he's saying?
I think that's a fair paraphrase. And if we think about this notion for a minute of we will like someone in direct proportion to how they make us feel, then if leaders want people to feel energetic, optimistic, hopeful, encouraged, respected, then it would follow that we'd have to behave in those ways in order to elicit those kinds of feelings.
Right.
Now, if you don't want people to feel that way, if you want them to feel angry and you want them to feel disillusioned, and you want them to feel hopeless, enraged, you can behave in other ways. So part of this then comes down to, as a leader, how do you want other people to feel?
Right. So
in relationship to you?
The skeptics might say that, or might gather from that, well, really what you're saying is then my job as a leader is to just make sure that I don't upset anybody, that I don't piss anybody off, that everybody feels good all the time, and we all walk around with goofy grins on our faces and all of that. So what do you say to the skeptic in that context?
Well, first of all, I'd say, what's wrong with people walking around feeling good all the time? What's so bad about that? I mean, what do you want? Let's argue the opposite. Oh, I want people to walk around glum and upset, and when because they're upset, they piss off their customers. And
okay, I get that, but so let me speak on behalf of the skeptic, because that's kind of what we got to do, right? If I'm so concerned about having everybody like me, then isn't that going to affect my decision making in terms of what's good for the business? Because I do have to make unpopular decisions from time to time, which people may not like, and it's not going to inspire them to walk around with a big grin on their face. They're going to be pissed. So should I avoid those kind of things?
So here, let me answer a question with a question. Do you have kids?
Millions of them, yes.
Yes, we know you do. You have kids. So we have a son. So, and you think about your kids, right? Do you want your kids to like you?
Yes.
Yes. Do they ever do things that upset you?
Yeah. Not so much anymore, but once upon a time, yeah.
Yes. And I can think of times when our son has upset us. So, does that mean I don't want him to like me? Right. I don't want him to still want him to love me, even though I might get angry with him from time to time, or upset with him from time to time. I mean, can we not have these two feelings at the same time? We are human beings, after all. And so if my dominant motivation is to want to have a good relationship with my constituents, direct reports, peers, my boss, if I'm in a hierarchical organization, my customers, wouldn't I want to behave in ways then that make them, quote, like me? As sort of as a generic term for all those feelings we want customers to have about us. If we want customers to like us, shop some more at our organization, buy our products and services, write good reviews on Yelp, don't we have to behave in ways that elicit those feelings? So the same is with employees. If I say to myself, I really want my employees to like me, I want them to respond positively towards me, I want them to feel like they respect me, then I need to behave in ways that elicit those kinds of feelings.
Right.
It's not just because I have a position. I'm the boss, and you like me because I'm the boss.
Right. Which goes back to your research, I think, on credibility, right? So what you and Barry have found over and over again all around the world is that credibility is the foundation of leadership. That without credibility, we've really got nothing. So when I put those two thoughts together, the more credibility, as a leader, the more credibility I have in the eyes of the people on my team, the more I can use the let's call it tough love when necessary. it gives me the capital that I need to hold people accountable and all those things that we, oftentimes tend to dismiss as or we're afraid of because we don't want to, rock the boat or whatever. So it really comes back down to the credibility that we have in the eyes of our constituents, right?
Yeah. So just to give those who are not familiar with our work on credibility, what we found in our research was that when we asked people, what do you look for and admire in a leader, someone whose direction you would willingly follow, we initially asked that question as an open-ended question. We got about 150 different attributes. We narrowed that down to 20 with synonyms for each one. And then we did a survey asking people to select 7 of the 20 characteristics, from ambitious all the way through supportive and bunch in between. The top 4 that people wanted from their leader, and just last week reaffirmed this in doing 2 separate surveys of 2 different populations. We found that the number 1 attribute is honest. People want leaders who are honest, have integrity, tell the truth. Secondly, they want leaders who are competent. They know what they're doing. They can get the job done. They want leaders who are inspiring, upbeat, optimistic, and they also want leaders who are forward-looking. Forward-looking in the sense of having a vision of the future, a sense of direction. Those are the top 4 for leaders. The top 3 for people who are considered credible are honest, competent, and inspiring. Forward-looking ends up being the differentiator for leaders. Leaders need to be forward-looking, whereas if you ask the same set of questions of peers, you wouldn't necessarily say, I want a peer to be forward-looking.
Right.
You'd still want them to be competent, and you'd want them to be honest, have integrity, tell the truth, but you wouldn't necessarily need them to be forward-looking. And so after reviewing that research, our research, and comparing it to some classic research on what's called source credibility in the academic literature, we found that the top 2 attributes, honest and competent, were highly correlated with the top 2 for credibility, which is trustworthiness and competence. And so the third one, what's called dynamism in the source credibility literature, correlates very strongly with inspiring, being upbeat, energetic. And so we concluded from that credibility is what people look for most in a leader. If they don't consider you credible, then you haven't built the foundation on which you can do everything else. Credibility is the foundation of leadership. If people don't believe then in the messenger, they won't believe the message. So a lot of these behaviors are really about sustaining and earning on a daily basis personal credibility as a leader.
So where, if anywhere, does love fit into that equation? So in the equation of credibility, it's sort of like credibility is the foundation then on which you build everything. The first things I have to do as a leader is I have to demonstrate that I'm credible, and in one phrase, which you just wrote about I think in a tweet you did recently. On LinkedIn.
A LinkedIn piece you did recently. You talked about how credibility is the foundation, and that behaviorally, credibility is put your money where your mouth is, walk the talk, practice what you preach, or do what you say you will do, DWYSYWD, DWYSYWD. And so behaviorally, you have to demonstrate to other people that you will follow through on your commitments, that you will put your money where your mouth is, that you will act on what your values and beliefs are. So with the foundation of credibility, acting with integrity on the values and beliefs that you espouse, you can then add all the other behaviors. leadership behaviors. So it's the foundation. So it doesn't directly relate to love, but it allows you to have the opportunity then to express all these other kinds of behaviors and emotions.
So when I put that together, what I hear is if credibility is the foundation, in other words, that's the bottom line necessity for a leader to have with his or her constituents. If you have credibility and no love in the equation, you still have a foundation on which to build. If there's love in the equation, but there's no credibility, that love can't endure, right? I mean, over time, so I might really I go to work for you, I love you, I feel great, but over time I see that you don't do what you say you're going to do. You're not being honest. You're not following through. I don't know. I could still love you kind of. It's that distinction that I hear a lot. It's like, well, yeah, I love him or her as a person, but I would never work with them again. Mm-hmm. So the quality of that love changes if the credibility disappears.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better.
So I want to go back for a second to your original inspiration for this, back to John Stanford, because I think it's really interesting that it came from an Army major general. It came from the military, which is stereotypically not where we would go as kind of source material for love, and because of the stereotypes involved. So you paraphrased his quote. I went and I looked it up because I have Leadership Challenge. Right?
Yeah, I got it in front of me too.
So I'm going to read that quote back to you, and then I have a couple of questions for you. So you asked him, what advice would you pass on? He said, I tell them I have the secret to success. That's a word to try to say. The secret to success in life. The secret to success is to stay in love. Staying in love gives you the fire to really ignite other people, to see inside other people, to have a greater desire to get things done than other people. A person who is not in love doesn't really feel the kind of excitement that helps them to get ahead and to lead others and to achieve. I don't know any other fire, any other thing in life that is more exhilarating and is more positive a feeling than love is. Beautiful words. I read that quote more times than I can remember to our clients back in the day at the Tom Peters Company at the end of the Leadership Challenge workshop. It was like a final words of inspiration, which is what you often do at the end of your workshops and your keynotes. It's a way to send people out. What that did for me is it made me ask the question, wait a minute, should that be the final note on this whole thing, or should that be the key in which we all play? And I just find it so interesting that your original inspiration for the practice that you guys call encouraging the heart came from a military guy. So I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that. What bearing does this love thing have in an organization that we typically think of as command and control, top down, following orders, et cetera, et cetera?
I've asked many military people about this. I've read them that quote, and I've asked them for their thoughts about it. And the most insightful response, I think it came from a colonel, retired colonel in the military. He says, well, Jim, it's very simple. That's because we have to be willing to die for our country and die for the people next to us on the battlefield. And if you don't love them, why would you want to die for them? Because particularly field soldiers, field officers who are out there fighting, what they're really fighting for at the moment they're fighting is for the person next to them in the foxhole. And they'll risk their lives and get out of that foxhole to rescue someone who's been shot, who's been injured, and pull them back. It's a never left behind philosophy. And so it emanates from that life and death scenario. And you think about the people that you love, and you would probably say that I would put my life on the line for those people. And so that's probably the most extreme example. But then I also hear the word love quite often from people in healthcare. Again, it's not in the same way, although today you are literally, during the pandemic, those working with COVID-19 patients are putting their lives on the line on a daily basis. Right. And other frontline workers, people who put out fires in California, as we're experiencing right now, or people who patrol the streets and help maintain peace and security in our lives are putting their lives on the line on a daily basis. And so I think the closer you are to that sense of life and death, the more that feeling is true for you. And so it's hard to replicate that kind of feeling in business, but I think it's an aspiration. Because if you think about it this way, if people know that you as their leader are willing to have their back, willing to support them in their times of need, willing to go the extra mile for them, then that's a demonstration of love, and they would be more willing to do the same for you. I mean, it's the same when we see this kind of expression you see this somewhat in the pandemic, and we've seen it in other difficult times, the Great Recession and other times of business crisis, where senior executives will take pay cuts or no salary at all in order to continue to employ people. In business, it's that kind of demonstration of caring for others that is, in a sense, a demonstration of love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just flashing back on how I heard you say more than once that you are not a fan of military metaphors in a business context. And it was, as I recall, it was in the context of kind of talking about competition, right? Mm-hmm. That we're going to beat our competition to death. We're going to annihilate them. We're going to blow them up. So that really stuck with me. And ever since I first heard you say that, I've been very careful about equating business with war, because obviously the stakes are very different. For the vast majority of us, unless, as you say, we're first responders or on the front line in COVID or something similar, it's not life or death. It's not literally life or death. There's still risks. There's still, high stakes oftentimes, but there's a place where the metaphor breaks down. Yeah. But yet there's some value in there that says, I am willing on our team, I'm willing to put myself at risk to sacrifice something of myself or potentially my career in order to help a colleague. Is the parallel that I can draw.
Yeah. So you asked why a military officer, the story from John Stanford. And my reflection on that is that it comes from that very extreme situation that faced by people in battle, that they face life and death. And then and that you also see that kind of thing in healthcare, and that healthcare people, teachers also frequently talk about love, loving their students, loving their subject. loving teaching. And it's not life and death in the same way, but you have young lives in your care. And the more you demonstrate to those young lives that you truly care about them, their well-being, their livelihoods, their satisfaction, their ability to do well in their lives, the more those students are going to be responsive to you.
Right.
And so I think if we had that frame as a way of looking at the work that we do, here are individuals who have limited resources, who are coming to our organization, spending those limited resources on our products and services. That is an act of grace. That is an act of, in some respects, love, of feeling like I'm giving something that it's hard-earned for me to you in return for something that I hope will serve me well. The more I understand that dynamic in business, and the more I act accordingly, that I understand you're making a small sacrifice here for our organization's benefit. And I want to recognize that. I want to honor that. The more I think, will come from a core sense of love.
Beautiful. Now, your and Barry's research came primarily out of the business world, right? At least in the beginning. But you've done a lot of work in the field of education, in nonprofits, on every continent on the planet, basically, right? So your research is not American research; it's international research.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for me, I have been, and I'd love to get your advice on this. I have been decidedly apolitical in all of my communication. I just don't talk politics, ever. Never have. And we're in a very contentious, polarized time right now, but there's always been some vestige of that. And the way that it's not that I don't have opinions. I've got some pretty strong opinions. I just don't feel like I should be. I feel like if I talk politics in a specific sort of a way, then I limit my ability to help and inspire a good chunk of the population, no matter which way I come down. So the way I justify it is I can help people by doing my work and helping them to interpret in the context of their businesses. And at the same time, here we are in an election year. And I'm just wondering, it's entirely up to you how specific you want to get, but do these same principles, do the same characteristics, like around credibility, for example, do they apply in a political arena in the same way that they apply to the people that I directly work with day to day? Or is there a difference?
Well, there is a difference, and yet the fundamentals apply. And we're experiencing that right now in this current election cycle. And yet here's the dilemma that every voter faces. And that is, it ends up being pretty much a binary choice. And when it comes down to a binary choice, you may excuse or ignore or hold your nose or whatever you choose to do when you vote, and say, because I only have this choice, there are other criteria I'm going to use to make the choice. And those come down to some fundamental values and beliefs about things that are important to me, whether it's taxes or whether it's a women's right to choose, or whether it's issues of security, whatever the choice might be, or whether it's about racial justice, whatever values then dominate your list of what's important to you will have more salience for you than they might for employee in an organization. And in an organization where the choice of who the leader is not necessarily made by the constituent, it's made by a board of directors in a business setting, particularly at the very top of organizations. That board of directors doesn't have the same criteria that they have to use. Well, we'll take a vote of employees and see where the chips lie. They can say, look, I look at the behavior of this person and I say to myself, there's been a lot of turnover at the top. That's costing us a lot of money and building a really bad reputation. And we've got half of our customers are pissed off at us, and we got, we're losing money, we're losing customers. We're going to make a decision on the top leadership. The board of directors, going to make that decision. We're going to make that decision on different criteria. Certainly, there will be some values-based decision making, but there will also be some more practical, pragmatic kinds of decisions that have to do with outcome measures. And outcome measures not just in the sense of profitability, but in the sense of how the public is responding to the organization. Right. So the fundamentals are still there, Steve. And when you go into the voting booth, you have to make a decision. But oftentimes, when it's a binary choice, and it's not just about that person, but about a set of fundamental values and beliefs about governance, there is some different criteria people are using to make decisions.
Yeah, and to state the obvious, I don't have the opportunity to vote for my leader in a business. It's not a classic democracy the way our greater society runs, right? But from the leadership perspective, in a business, it seems to me, I need to act as though people are voting for me, because it's one thing to command and control and demand, and it's another thing to have people engage because they're committed, because they want to.
Yeah. But and that's precisely the question we asked when we asked people about credibility. We asked, what do you look for and admire in a leader? Someone whose direction you would willingly follow. And it's that word willingly that's important in the responses people gave. So, I would willingly follow somebody who's honest, competent, forward-looking, and inspiring as my top criteria. If the person doesn't have those qualities, I'm less likely to want to follow them. Yeah. I may have to follow them, but I may not want to. And then I ratchet back my engagement in the organization. When you think about how we measure success in organizations these days, or effectiveness in organizations, we're not only looking at outcome measures like profitability, sales, performance measures like that. We're also looking at engagement, and leaders are being assessed around engagement. And when we have low engagement, we know people put forth less effort. They're more likely to turn over. They are not likely to say good things about us when we're not around. Engagement will be lower. So I think the foundation still holds, but we also have to look at the context when we're taking a look at political leadership versus organizational leadership. Right. That's not in a political context.
Yeah. So as we begin to bring this in for a landing, I could do this all day, but I know you and I both have some schedule things that we got to pay attention to. The model that has emerged from your research it gave rise to the 5 practices of exemplary leaders. Emblazoned in my brain is the order in which you used to talk about it. But so in no particular order, modeling the way, encouraging the heart, inspiring a shared vision, challenging the process, and enabling others to act. Right? Now, one of those, as we've already mentioned, is this idea of encouraging the heart, which is most directly related to love, being just damn good business and just damn good leadership. Now, just for the sake of context for our listeners, what your research has shown is that all 5 of those practices are important. You need to have all of them if you're going to be an effective leader. The focus on encouraging the heart is a place that, again, that's where I chose my focus, particularly by being overt with and intentional around love as a practice. And you guys refer to these as the 5 practices, not the 5 theories, not the 5 ideas, but the 5 practices, which means they are behavioral. So if we focus in on encouraging the heart, as you kind of send us off back into the real world, what are some of the activities, behaviors, things we could do to more effectively cultivate love in our teams and in our companies and in our communities, et cetera?
Well, encouraging the heart does have the word love in it, in the sense that it has the word cœur, which is heart. So it's kind of a redundant phrase, encourage the heart, when you're giving heart to heart. We are really putting our hearts into our business, and the business in our hearts, and the people that we serve, and the people who also work with us to serve those customers and clients. And so when we're encouraging the heart, essentially we're doing 2 things, as you know. We're, first of all, recognizing individuals for their contributions. And we're also then celebrating as a team. So it's both an individual one-on-one as well as a team activity where we're getting together and celebrating in various ways. I'm going to read you something, Steve, that I think gives the essence of how one can, right after they listen to this and they want to recognize someone, can put this into practice. This comes from a woman named Rachel Argamon, who is the CEO of TFE Hotels in Australia, New Zealand. And she every year gives out to those individuals who have reached a certain level in the organization of performance bonuses. And she does about 400 of these a year. And for 4 days, she sits down and writes individual notes to people. And this is one of those notes. It says, "Dear Ben, what an inspirational piece of advice you gave me when you recommended that outstanding hotel manager to the L&D management role. You grasped this job with both hands, immediately owning the space and taking full responsibility for it. Your inimitable style, care, loyalty to TFE, and love for leadership shine through all that you do. 1,000 thank yous, Rachel." That is a handwritten note by her to Ben. Now, what do you notice about that note when you hear it?
It's very specific.
Very specific. So one of the things when you're encouraging the heart, it's not all general, "Oh, thanks, Steve, for the great interview." But you go into specifics, into a bit more detail. "Thanks for that. That specific question really touched me. You really drilled down to the heart of the matter when you asked that." Something that indicates something a bit more specific than just a generic contribution. She also, because it was specific, what did she have to do?
Well, she had to know that it was happening. She had to notice. She had to pay attention.
Yeah, she had to pay attention. She had, and she tells this story back to him about the L&D role. So she's in a sense now communicating to him, and I'm communicating to others in telling a story about this, that this is something specific to Ben. So telling a story about someone in an organization is another way to help other people see a couple of things. One, Ben really excelled here and needs to be recognized, needs some applause from all of us. But also, hey, here's a standard for you to live up to. if Ben can do, the implication is Ben did this, you can too. And so you have a standard that you're displaying through this note as well about what your expectations are of individuals. And you've personalized it to Ben, not just send him flowers and a box of candy or whatever it is that you might send. Those are great too. I highly encourage us to do that. But, it's the personalization that makes this so outstanding as a way of recognition. So those are some of the keys.
And I would add another element to that too. It's a concrete, tangible thing, the note itself.
Yeah.
I'm pretty confident that Ben didn't take that note, read it, and go, "Oh, that's cool," and then toss it in the trash.
No,
no. There's a
he did not.
On his refrigerator with that note underneath it. Absolutely.
And making it tangible is a way that it sustains itself over time. So what, can I share one more story?
Please, yeah.
And this is just an illustration of how even posthumously people encourage our hearts. In Truckee, California, where my wife Tay and I were, and go periodically up to the Sierra Mountains. There is a building in downtown Truckee, small town at the foot of North Lake Tahoe, and on this building, which is an old train station, there is a wooden sign, and the wooden sign is nailed to the side of the building, and it reads, "This building is dedicated to the memory of Ignatius Joseph Firpo." I don't know who Ignatius Joseph Firpo is, but he was actually a shop owner, turns out, in Truckee, California. Then it says, quote, "What we have done for ourselves dies with us. What we have done for others remains and is immortal." So as we think about how we want to be remembered by other people, I think what's important for us to remember, just like Rachel's note, is that we're remembered not for the things that we did for ourselves, not for our bank accounts, not for our homes and cars, but for what we do for others. That's how we are remembered in the stories that people tell about us. And so I think it's important that we all think about the legacy we want to leave behind and how we want to be remembered by others. Do we want to be remembered as someone who was a loving person, not just someone who achieved a lot? And if we do, then how will we behave accordingly? The framework I like to tell people to use in thinking about legacy and thinking about how you personally want to be remembered, which is in some ways a way your heart is encouraged in perpetuity, is to ask yourself about four things. First, what are the lessons you hope people will say they learned from you? What are the ideals that you stood for? What are the feelings that people had when they are around you or were around you? And what would you want them to say is the evidence that you made a difference, that you had an impact? Something tangible. The acronym for that is LIFE, L-I-F-E. Lessons, ideals, feelings, and evidence. And back to credibility, coming full cycle. The legacy you leave is the life you lead. The lessons that you teach, the ideals you stand for, the feelings people have. They talk about, when I was around this person, I felt this way, and the evidence that you did something that made a difference. So I think as we think about how we want to be remembered, how we want our hearts to be encouraged in our own lives, that's a useful framework for us to aspire to.
It is beautiful. And it goes right back to, it's about how the things that we do that make people feel a certain way. And that's a more kind of specific framework around that very thing. It's really beautiful. It's a very, as usual, coming from you, it's a very simple and elegant framework that has so many applications to it. One last thing before we sign off, I had a bit of a flashback, as I've had a few of those in this conversation, but the very first time you and I ever spoke, and what reminded me of it was what you were just saying about the power of story. I remember sitting in a conference room at 555 Hamilton Avenue in Palo Alto. You and I were sitting in a conference room in the office of one of the offices of the Tom Peters Company, and you were interviewing me. And it was the first time we ever had a long conversation. And you said to me, you know what we really do here, Steve? We are storytellers. Our job is to tell the right stories that give the right examples. And that went so deep in me that I've never forgotten it. And one of my greatest joys in life is having the platform and the ability to tell a great story, because of all the lessons in that and all the lessons that I've learned from you over the years. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. And you're a great student because you tell great stories. Your books are an example of that. But when you're in front of an audience, and I've observed this many times, that's what really lights people up. And so thank you for that.
Thank you, Jim. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in to Love is Just Damn Good Business, the podcast. And until next time, please remember to do what you love in the service of people who love what you do. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Love is Just Damn Good Business with Steve Farber. Join us again next time, because when customer and employee satisfaction just isn't enough anymore, we are here to back you up with specific ideas to operationalize love to make an enormous difference in your business, personal life, and the world around you. Visit our website at stevefarber.com to leave a review. And don't forget to share the love with your colleagues and friends, because after all, it's just damn good business.